So what is expected of Spencer Rattler statistically and in terms of points on the scoreboard versus what would be expected of him in his position at Kansas State, Stanford, Purdue, wherever, almost everywhere else. There is a all-time legacy, and there's a very recent legacy of just prolific quarterback play that's just at the top of the sport.
Yeah.
So that's what's expected of him. So throwing twice as many touchdowns as picks and putting up, 25 points a game average, that's not good enough. I'm not saying that's what he's doing. I'm just saying, for an example, that's not good enough.
Yep.
The quarterback play and statistics and points per game that he would put up elsewhere doesn't cut it there. So that's first and foremost is the standard of the position at Oklahoma. Number two would be, yes, and I stated very much in line with what you just stated when I was asked about it, caller after caller after caller after caller on Saturday, that I didn't necessarily know, and I watched almost every play of that game. I typically try to watch like 3 or 4 games at the same time, but of course that game was paramount at noon, that Caleb Williams obviously came in, provided a spark, all those things. But in terms of who is the better quarterback, the better player, throwing, running, I think they're different players, so that's obvious. But in terms of total production, not necessarily that Spencer Rattler, especially in previous games and recent previous games, was playing that poorly at all.
Right.
There's a component of who's the better player, and it's at the quarterback position, which is different than just selecting who should be our tight end. Who's the best tight end? Well, okay, he's the best tight end, especially for what we do. He's not necessarily directly impacting the other players on the offense. You make that call within a vacuum. Whereas the quarterback position, there was an obvious, and I usually don't speculate on this or try to read into things, but a fairly obvious response by the rest of the team to Caleb Williams versus Spencer Rattler. That, again, at that position, it's unique in the sport, quarterback. You're also looking at, okay, who's got the respect of his teammates, who's being inspired because of their play and their leadership, who has the leadership qualities, who is making a greater impact to play this position rather than just evaluating who can throw a football better, who can run better. So there's that element to it, and it seems as though Caleb Williams has that. And one other note before I let you go back into this, Jason, would be, and that's sometimes unique to that person versus that person, that player versus that player, but sometimes it also involves that situation. And I think we see that more so because of the length of the career in the NFL, where a particular quarterback who had certain knocks and criticisms against him in a certain situation then went to some other situation, and that was the right fit. The right coaches, his teammates responded differently, and suddenly they had a revival, a rebirth of their career, just in a different situation.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, Mark, there's tons to unpack about this. I mean, one of the stats that I saw out of the game Saturday, and for Oklahoma struggles, they almost had 700 yards of total offense in that game. But I think one thing that was very paramount, Rattler was on the field for 31 snaps, 151 total yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, or 2 turnovers. Caleb Williams was on the field for 50 snaps, 511 total yards, 5 touchdowns, no turnovers. So, I mean, that's one way to look at it. I mean, I think there's so many different intangibles that you have to look at with this situation. You know, one of them is, for whatever reason, I know there's some rumors about Spencer not being as dedicated to the on the field team as maybe his teammates and students that are fans that would like to see. So I don't know if that's it, or just kind of some of the turnovers that he's made. And to your point, Mark, he played well last week against Kansas State. I think he was 22 out of 25, 260 some yards. He did throw the one interception, but he was, incredibly accurate. But he just in this game, I think it was like 8 out of 15, so barely over 500. And then he had those 2 turnovers with the one rushing touchdown. So I think the one thing that you have to think about, and there was a comment here that if you don't start Caleb, you very much run the risk of losing the locker room. So I think and that's something that Lincoln absolutely has to take into consideration when he goes about this. So that's one. That's certainly one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, quite frankly, and I think he would probably say he didn't handle it. Rattler didn't handle it well. And I know it's hard to handle. Something like that. I mean, it's kind of like, you're in a situation where you're being fired on national TV and everybody's looking at you and watching you get fired and watching how you're going to react to that. So, he didn't react as well as I think a lot of people would have hoped that he would. I think in some of the in what I mean by that, Mark, in some of the situations after the 66-yard touchdown run, a lot of people when he got to the sideline came and congratulated him. Spencer wasn't one of them. There was some stuff about after the game was over, Spencer kind of going into the locker room by himself. I think that was more the Oklahoma administration, just kind of getting him away from that situation, knowing how he's probably. I mean, It's kind of interesting. He's more disliked than I can think of any player in the recent in recent past in terms of being booed and in terms of like chanting for the backup quarterback almost every game since West Virginia. Even in this game, we heard it in the stands. So I think Lincoln doesn't really have a whole lot of choice. I mean, I think you have to. Obviously, you don't. Like I said, you don't cater to the fans, but um, you thought you heard some booing in that West Virginia game. I think if a Rattler trots out there first, I think the fans will be in an uproar. So I think, and I think there's one way to look at, if you have a guy that's very popular and maybe has won the locker room, but he's clearly not as good as the other guy. I mean, maybe that's a different situation. Maybe that's a different scenario that you're getting in. But Caleb was equal as good, and I think there's a little bit to be said for maybe Texas wasn't prepared for him. TCU will be a little bit more prepared. So I think that's part of the consideration. And I think lastly, I think Caleb is a guy that is probably best suited to lead this team based on some of the lack of productivity that Oklahoma has on the offensive line. So I think his scrambling ability, his ability to run the football, with zone reads or predetermined run, draw plays, stuff like that, gives Oklahoma a little bit of a better chance to extend some of those plays. As you saw, two of the biggest plays, those long the long touchdown pass to Marvin Mims, and then the long reception to Marvin Mims was Caleb Williams just getting out of the pocket and then just trying to make a play. I think one of the other things that you've seen out of Rattler this year is really just his inability to kind of take chances down the field, where you saw Caleb Williams do that. So I think all of those things combined, to me, would be, and it's a tough, like I said, it's a tough decision from his perspective, from a coaching, from a human element. I think more than anything, knowing what you do to this kid. But I think at the same time, you look at it and you take a lot away from the situation that Alabama had with Jalen and Tua. And I think Nick Saban handled that really, really well. But at the same time, you've got to have a kid that has the maturity level of a Jalen Hurts to be able to accept that and do exactly what he did. Because no matter where Oklahoma goes from here, there's probably going to be a situation, whether it be just a 2-point conversion like happened on Saturday, or an injury, or he's still a true freshman, so he's going to make some mistakes. a situation where Rattler might be needed. So, and he's going to have to be ready. So, I don't know if he's there yet. There was some, and a little kind of a lot of this is internet. There's been about, I've double digit rumors about Rattler since this happened on Saturday. But one of the kind of rumors that was a little bit prevalent on Monday, and then a little bit more yesterday, was that Rattler didn't show up to practice on Monday. And Mondays typically for Oklahoma is a kind of a recovery day and a film day. And so Lincoln Riley actually talked about that and said Rattler was not at practice, was not with the team on Monday. He gave him a day off to kind of rest and relax and kind of get refreshed. So again, you don't know behind the scenes if he was that, because I think Rattler even said he was a little bit sick, just wasn't feeling well. So you look at that and say, does it have anything to do with his mentality right now, or was he truly sick? Did he need another day? So it's just going to be very interesting, and it's something that Lincoln's never had to deal with at Oklahoma. They've never had and I hate to use the word quarterback controversy, but they've never had a quarterback open competition in the middle of the year. So I think he'll probably, if he hasn't called Saban yet, I wouldn't be surprised if he called him just to get some perspective on how he handled that and how the best way would be to handle that situation.
So I try to refrain from reading into hearts and minds. I do my best, but a lot of what we do here and are asked to do, uh, whether it's trying to determine what coach would take what position at what school or a situation like this, again. So I noticed as well, there was a very tight shot on Spencer Rattler on the sideline after the Caleb Williams touchdown, the one of many, the one of what, five, but the one in which he ran for 66 yards, which was an incredible run, and just erupted the place. And there was a tight shot on Spencer Rattler, and he was just stone faced.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm of the belief that we are by human nature selfish. Now, what we do with that is different from person to person. So we're going to internalize everything. We're going to think about ourselves. What does this mean for me? What am I hurt by? What am I affected by? How does this affect me? And that's perfectly normal, especially at that age, is perfectly normal to think, woe is me. I'm the victim in this situation. This is hurting me, and this is not good for me. But what do you do with those internal feelings? Do you say, okay, I'm going to be a good teammate. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to celebrate with my team. That's the response to make in that situation. And yeah, I didn't want to blow it out of proportion because I didn't see it carry all the way through, but it appeared in that particular moment, okay, he's not responding in a way that you would expect a good teammate to respond, to be happy for the team, to be happy for your teammate, to celebrate. You're still a member of the team. There are players that are in that position every moment of every game where they don't participate on the field, but they're still have the uniform on. They're still at every practice. They're still technically as much a part of that team as everybody else is, and on the roster, and they take part and they celebrate. They feel good about what they're accomplishing as a team. And we didn't necessarily see that.
Yeah, and like I said, it's for us on the outside looking, it's something that you would like to see, but at the same time, you have to understand the kid's perspective. He had, um, he had everything in front of him, and then all of a sudden he thinks maybe, I mean, that's probably his thought process that now I have to start all over. That's
Mm-hmm.
the situation, and I mean, and that's kind of the nature of the game, right? I mean, like I said, there's similar. You can take a lot from the Jalen Hurts and Tua situation as well. Jalen had to do, I mean, essentially the same thing, starting quarterback for the best program in the country, specifically at that time, and he gets replaced at second half in the second half of the national championship game, and he never gets his start back again. However, at the same time, he stayed engaged, he improved, and where he really needed to improve, even there in Alabama. And then when he was counted on in the SEC championship game, he came in and he delivered. So I think that's the process. And again, there's a lot of assumptions. I think everybody immediately says, "Okay, Spencer Rattler's going to transfer now." Well, I mean, I think conventional wisdom. I think in the back of our mind, just kind of how college football works right now, the societal impact with, with college football. Um, Makes you think that you got a top guy. Okay, he's the next best thing. Eventually, I'm going to transfer. Obviously, it looks absolutely horrendous for him if he was to transfer midseason. So I think even if he's decided that's what he wants to do, now he's got to wait till at least until the after the season's over, or it's just I think just a bad look for him just in general. In terms of hey, I don't want to compete. So, and I fully expect that he would stay till the end of the year. So, but yeah, I mean, I think there's no denying the spark that Caleb Williams brought to this team, and who's to say that just kind of going back and forth, seeing some of the comments here, but who's to say that Rattler would not have been able to bring them back? But he just was not playing well at all in that game. Like I said, barely completing over 50% of his passes, had a couple turnovers, almost had a third, and then undeniable that. And then I'm not saying the offensive line blocked better when he was in the game versus versus when Rattler was in the game. But the stats kind of speak for themselves. So I don't necessarily think it's that. I think it's probably more of the element of the run, which probably changed things a little bit from an offensive line perspective and overall. And yeah, the crowd had um, a big factor in this game. Obviously, in the second half, defense was a big factor in just how well they played, how much pressure they put on. But he was still able to make those plays. I think he had over almost 300 yards of total offense for Caleb, and just almost a little bit more than half. So